you can just give your child 8 to 10 minutes of undivided attention a day, it makes a significant difference.
Welcome to Transforming the Toddler Years, a Core 4 parenting podcast blending soul and science-based strategies to empower pandemic moms like you, raising kindergarten-ready kids. I'm Cara Tyrrell, your host, a lifetime lover of littles, girl mom, early childhood educator, and conscious parenting coach who truly believes that how we connect and collaborate with our kids in the first 5 years is how we raise world-ready kids who will change this world. Okay, mamas, you asked, so here's your episode on COVID babies who are now toddlers with speech delays. I have Kristi Schlessinger here with me today, and she's a licensed speech and language pathologist and a certified lactation counselor. What this means is she combines her work with young children in the areas of early language and feeding development. Over 12 years in private practice, she took the world of early intervention into private parent coaching and courses. And her work helps you know if your child truly has a delay and how to recover it and get them talking and meeting those milestones. If you have a late talker, if you have a picky eater, if you have a kid who isn't meeting their gross motor milestones, this is the episode for you. Enjoy. Kristi, we are so excited you're here as part of our Back to School mini-series on the show. You are a toddler mom, so you get what's going on in the world of toddlerhood. And you're also a speech and language pathologist, and you also have expertise with early eating struggles. We have so much to learn from you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here.
All right, so we're just going to dive right in because there's so much to cover. Parents who had true COVID babies are sending their kids to some type of program, potentially for the first time ever this fall. Whether it's a preschool program, a twos program, or maybe just full-time childcare for the first time since they were born. And we are seeing record number of referrals for kids who are late to meet their oral speech milestones. What are you seeing?
Yeah, so I'm actually seeing exactly the same thing. It's very interesting because the research is still kind of ongoing. I mean, this is really obviously a very new problem. They're not really sure exactly why. There are a couple of theories bouncing around, but the fact is that there is a huge increase in the number of kids that are being referred for speech and language services. And I think that's become a nationwide problem.
It has. And, being a speech and language pathologist, that there aren't enough of you to go around. And so parents, specifically conscious moms like our listeners, shout out to all the moms who are feeling proactive and saying, I think there's something going on and I'd love to get it investigated and dealt with, are finding that the wait time just to get the assessment is so long that they're concerned that their child is falling even further and further behind. How can we help?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really big problem because we look at that critical window of development. We know there's so much research to support that the earlier we intervene, the earlier we support them, the better they're going to progress, the less services they're going to need later on. And the goal is always to get them going into kindergarten completely caught up and not needing any services at all. But the systems, when they're actually put in place, exactly like you said, there tends to be really long wait lists or just shortages of therapists in specific areas. So it's definitely a struggle. And there has been a big movement in the early intervention world towards parent coaching. And I've seen that to be so much even more effective than direct therapy. Because I kind of liken it to if you go to therapy for anything else. So if you break your arm and you go to physical therapy and they give you exercises to do, if you never do those exercises and you're only practicing when you're with your physical therapist, it's going to take you a really, really long time to get better. And a 2-year-old can't go home and practice what they're doing with their speech therapist. So it really falls on the parent to be the one to implement those strategies. But there's so much information out there. It can be super overwhelming. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And the fact is, too, that a lot of trusted loved ones and even pediatricians are still going with that wait and see approach. And unfortunately, that's really kind of been proven to not be the best suggestion.
Absolutely. So here's what I'm hearing you say, that parents are with their kids the majority of the time, and that you are their language model. What's coming out of your mouth and the way that you speak, the way you engage and interact with them, you're basically creating their early dictionary. So what I'd love for you to do is kind of give us like a mini lesson, because so many parents, they look at the milestones and they say, they're not meeting them, because they look at the expressive language as the way we measure. Are they talking enough? And are they saying what they're supposed to say? But receptive language is almost more important during those early years. So can you give us the layman's version of receptive versus expressive language in infants and toddlers?
Absolutely. So receptive language is your child's understanding of language, and that needs to develop first before they can start talking. And so it's a little bit more complicated, because that's not as black and white as, okay, they're saying this word, so I know that they understand it. And then the actual saying the words, that's their expressive language. So how they're using their language.
Fantastic. Yeah, I love playing with receptive language capabilities. And it's just so, for example, if you say to your child, where are your yellow boots? And they get up and they move their body and they go to the drawer across the room, open it and pull out their boots and bring them to you. That was receptive language that was appropriately processed. And then they took action on the request.
Absolutely. And there's so much that goes into understanding that, because not only do they have to have the vocabulary for shoes, but they have to understand yellow. And then they also have to understand the WH questions. They have to understand what it means when you say where. And that's why questions can be a really, really complicated skill. So actually, one of the tips that I often tell the parents that I'm working with, if they have concerns about their child's speech and language, is to minimize using questions, because there is so much that goes into them, so much processing. And instead of asking questions, just modeling that language. So you might say, oh, here are your yellow shoes. And a lot of parents tend to think that that's like giving them the answer. You want to kind of see what your child knows, because it's so exciting when they know it. But by just giving them that label, you're taking the pressure off of them. We know that toddlers are craving control in any way they can find it. We see that in their feeding start to come out. So if we're giving them the opportunity to refuse to say something, they're probably going to take advantage of that. So by just modeling the language instead of asking questions, we can take the pressure off. We give them kind of a no-fail situation, and then also still expose them to the language that we're wanting them to use.
I love how you talked about the processing time, because that is an invisible process that to us is done instantaneously. As the adult, we've asked the question because we already know the answer, so we are leagues ahead of them. As a general rule, how long should we give our toddlers to process either information that we've given them or a request that we've asked?
Yeah. So I actually tell parents to try to wait 5 seconds. And the first time I tell them that and then kind of model that out for them, they're shocked, because it really does seem like such a long time. But it really just comes down to the fact that their little brains are still building all those connections, and they really need that time. So sometimes I'll say, if that's way too long, because it does feel really awkward, just start with 2 or 3 seconds and see how your little one responds. But generally, 3 to 5 seconds is about how much time they need.
So I have a funny story, because I have a kiddo. She's an adult now, but she has auditory processing disorder. And when she was younger, once the diagnosis came through, because I knew something was up, I just wasn't sure what. And it takes a long time to get that.
Yeah, that's
diagnosis.
a tricky one.
That's a really tricky one. I said, I made that rule for myself, so I didn't get frustrated, because she would ask me a question. Where are my shoes? And I would know that she knew, but she was just having so much trouble with her recall. I would count from the other room, 1, 2, 3. And by the time I got to 4, she'd be like, oh, I found them. So instead of us ending up in you know where your shoes are, just go get them, in some type of power struggle, it was she solved the problem on her own. I just had to give her the space and time. And I kept saying, okay, good Lord, I'm practicing patience. I'm practicing patience. And that's my mom job.
Absolutely. And waiting is one of the best skills you can use. It doesn't take any sort of training. You can start using it right away. But just giving that pause anytime even during play, anytime you're interacting with your little one, just giving them a couple more seconds, whether you're modeling language or you're showing them a new play skill, just giving them a couple of extra moments before you move on. You'd be so surprised how much more of a response you get from them.
It's so gratifying. It really is. I get that hit of dopamine as a playmate, and they get that hit because they feel like they achieved something.
Yes.
All right. So from the SLP standpoint, moms are listening who have 1, 2, 3-year-olds. Where should these kiddos be at those benchmarks? How many words? 2-word phrases, 3-word phrases, full sentences?
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing I want to mention about milestones is that the milestone marker is actually not the average for the age. It's actually what 90% of children can do. So it's kind of a lower expectation. So if your little one is really just barely meeting the milestone, that may be a sign that you might want to speak with a speech therapist. But I'll give you some of the milestones that we look for. So for a 1-year-old, we want them to be using anywhere between 1 and 5 words and understanding a 1-step direction. Obviously, as they go through that first year, that's going to develop a little bit more. 2-year-olds, we look for around 50 words, and they might start following 2-step directions. Once they have 50 words, again, that's just the milestone. That's kind of the minimum marker. But at 50 words is when they start being able to combine 2 words together. So the average for a 2-year-old would be 200 to 300 words. So you can see that the gap between the average and the milestone gets so much bigger.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And this is the thing with gaps is they start out small enough that we can just say, oh, I'm sure they'll fill themselves in. But gaps get exponentially bigger over time instead of smaller unless we attend to them. And this is why I'm just so grateful that you're here sharing the wisdom with us, but then also there's this information because a lot of parents are just flying blind.
Exactly. And there is, yeah, go ahead.
Before COVID, a lot of these pieces didn't exist because they were filled in by kids going out into the world and hearing other children as models, going out into the world and hearing a variety of grown-ups talking with different dictionaries and different ways of tone and inflection. And now they've had very singular insulated models. And I personally think that is one of the pieces that's coming out as we see these kids who are 3. For example, there's a mom here who put in a question. She said, my child's 38 months old. So for those of you who want the math, that's 3 years, 2 months old. Yeah. And he skips non-essential connecting words and he's very blunt. He still says, drink, please. His receptive speech is fine, but his expressive speech is very fragmented and he can make all his letter sounds, but when he tries to make them together, it doesn't really work. What are you seeing as far as how parents can, now that the world is open again, try to help these kids recover some of these opportunities?
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I say that it's really not a one-size-fits-all approach where you can, Google some strategies that your child might use in speech therapy. But the fact is that I've had so many parents tell me, well, they understand everything, but they're just stubborn but they just don't listen. And yes, they're toddlers and they're going to be stubborn sometimes, but at the end of the day, usually there's some sort of breakdown in their receptive language. And it's kind of teasing out what exactly that breakdown is so that you can work from there. If you dive right to the expressive piece and you forget about the understanding, it tends to not be as effective. And it tends to be more frustrating for parents because they're doing all the right things, quote unquote, but they're not seeing results. And that's extremely frustrating for them.
That is extremely frustrating when you're this conscious, right? This intentional about wanting to create the environment for your child to thrive, and you just don't feel like they are. It is so challenging. Yeah. So what are you telling people to do out in the world? What are some of the best activities that they can either go to their child with or sign their child up for?
Yeah, so activities are great. Anything that's going to give them opportunities to interact with other children, opportunities to just engage in their world, even bringing them food shopping. There's so many ways you can incorporate language strategies into just your everyday activities. You don't have to spend tons of money and take them to tons of fancy activities. If you can, that's amazing. But the important takeaway is that everything can be done just throughout your daily routines. I preach so much about the importance of play, but I also understand that most families don't have tons of time to sit down and play with their child. There's a lot of research to show that if you can just give your child 8 to 10 minutes of undivided attention a day, it makes a significant difference. So if you're figuring out where your child is and implementing those strategies and working with them just throughout your day, it's a lot less overwhelming for you as a parent because we just don't have the time to set aside hours in a day to work with them.
We don't. But, this idea that you're telling us is science-based, which I love because you really embody that soul connection and that science background that we love here at Core 4.
Yes.
This idea that science is telling us that it is quality over quantity, that putting away and detaching mentally from other tasks and physically from our phones and other physical items that would distract us, and giving our kids 10 minutes a day. Who doesn't have 10 minutes? And here's what I think, and you tell me if this is true. When you tell parents that and then they implement it, do they say to you, all of a sudden 20 or 30 minutes went by and I couldn't believe it? We were just having so much fun.
Absolutely. And I think the more we work together to kind of build their skills, the more confident they feel. And then they don't need me as much anymore. They can, they then have the tools to help their child. And then I'm still there to support them and answer their questions. But empowering the parent to help their child is just so much more effective than I used to work in a private practice. So little ones would come to me and they would come into my therapy room and I would work with them for half an hour and they'd go on their merry way. And it was great. But, I had this realization, well, why wasn't their progress as good as the little ones I was seeing in the community where I was going into their homes? And the difference was that when I was going into their homes, I'm really teaching the families the strategies rather than just working with the child. And that makes all the difference.
And that's the goal, right? Parents aren't supposed to need us in that type of intensive way forever. The goal is a transformation. In my course, it's a transformation that leaves them feeling just like yours, confident, empowered, has the language that they need to mitigate power struggles before they start, so that everybody feels like they're doing well on the other side. And with yours, it's the language they need in order to help their child develop language. So let me ask you this, because baby talk, actual babies learning to talk, right? They're not real words. It's adorable. It's very cute. As parents, we tend to mimic it when they're tinies, and that is part of the natural process. And then they get a little bit older. So say we now have a 2-year-old, but their speech delay is such that they are still using some of their baby pronunciations, and we're still mimicking them back because they're cute. What are we doing to hinder that developmental process?
Yeah, so we absolutely, even at a young age, so we can start kind of encouraging their language skills really from day one. Obviously, there's a lot more going on with a newborn, but making small tweaks in the way that you engage with them really can make all the difference. So there's a big difference between baby talk, which is that, not saying your sounds like, oh, little baby, not saying your sounds correctly, maybe not using correct grammar, and it's cutesy, but it's kind of, I've seen not being used as much anymore, which is great, because really what we want to be using is something called parentese. It's got a couple names. You may also hear motherese or child-directed speech. It goes by a few names. But what that basically means is that that's that higher pitched, sing-songy type of voice where you're maybe stretching out your vowels and it's keeping your little one really engaged, but you're still pronouncing words correctly and you're still using correct grammar.
Full sentences. I always tell parents, keep it short, right? For the processing speed, 4 or 5 words max, but definitely speak in full sentences. Hey, Mama, can we do a quick check-in? How are you? No, how are you really? Back to school is a very triggering time full of high stress transitions and new routines. Are you registered for the Transforming Your Triggers workshop? So many amazing conscious mamas already are, and I'm thrilled to be your guide to move from knee-jerk reactions to conscious, intentional responses. The workshop's coming up. It's Wednesday, September 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we're going to be together live, face to virtual face. There's so much power in this. If you can't make it or a mom emergency pops up, there's a replay, but do this for yourself. Do this for your kids. Let's learn and grow together and help your family thrive at home and at school. To register for this free workshop, just go to caratyrrell.com/workshop or use the link in the show notes to register for this transformative hour. I cannot wait to see you there. So there's a little girl who I used to care for, and she cracked me the heck up because she could not pronounce forehead for the longest time. So she called it her forehead, which is just too adorable.
Very cute.
And it stuck, right? So then people would start asking her, where's your forehead? And now she believes that that's the word for your forehead, right? So this is how that cycle can evolve if we don't say, oh, we need to take ownership of that. All right, I have another question from a mom who knows that early intervention is really important. Her child was in ECI, the early intervention program, but aged out of it, is still speech delayed, but no longer qualifies for next level services. And I know that state to state, that percent that you have to reach a delay in order to qualify can vary. In Vermont, it's 40%. That seems extreme to me, but it's true. So if she's in this situation, how does she seek out support if she can't get, and the converse, if people are not putting their child into a traditional program this year and they are 3 and they think there's a speech issue, can they find some supports in their community? Because people are looking.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is definitely, I live in New York. I know it's a big problem here, but from what I've heard from other parents, it's a big problem, not even just across the US, but really around the world, where little ones are either not qualifying for services, quote unquote, because they're not as delayed as they are expected to be to qualify for those free services. But unfortunately, that creates a situation for parents where they think that their child doesn't need the support because they didn't qualify. So it's a really tricky situation because your child may have a slight delay and there could be other supports put into place. But unfortunately, like you said, those ECI services, the early intervention services, they sometimes don't qualify for. So if you have a little one who is not qualifying for services, you have a couple of options. It does vary based on where you live. In New York, once they turn 3, their local school district is responsible. So you would call up your local school district. But again, that varies based on your location. You can always start by contacting your county or your school district to find out more information. You also have the option to call your insurance company and see what services they offer. And then you can seek out a private speech therapist in that way.
Those are 3 amazing options. How does birth date figure into this? Because that cutoff piece is another educational component that parents say, this doesn't make any sense. Just because my child is 2 years and 10 months, right, doesn't mean that I don't want them in preschool when the fall starts. So how does the cutoff apply to speech services?
Yeah. So one thing is we always want to factor in their adjusted age. So if your baby was born, say 8 weeks early, and they're maybe approaching 2, then we have to subtract that from their current age. And that's what we're expecting for their skill level. However, those ages and those adjusted ages don't really qualify. They don't transition over into the system. So 3, it goes by the calendar age, and that's that. But if they still need more support, like I said, it's birth to 3, and I think globally is the early intervention age. And then going on from there, the system is run differently. And again, the goal is, okay, well, once they turn 3, we've given them enough support so that they can go on their way. But unless the support is really given to the parent as well, so they can continue on. And the fact is, some kids just still require the services past that point.
They absolutely do. So I'll just add something that I'm very familiar with because I'm a consultant in some of the classrooms, that nationally there is an organization called Head Start. And Head Start is for people who qualify financially. Mm-hmm. So you're a lower income status, and they offer preschool to your children from the age of 3. And you would have access to services through that program because they would then assess your children. So if you think that's a qualification financially that you might meet, that's another really great way to seek support and get yourself a little bit of, it's 10 hours a week free. You can go ahead and get 10 hours a week free where it's your time. And your child gets 10 hours a week to do everything we were just talking about. Kristi was saying, get them engaging with other kids, get them hearing other adults, get them practicing new routines. Meets both.
Right. Absolutely. And, they did qualify for any sort of speech and language program. A lot of times the therapist can work with the classroom teacher or in the classroom setting, if that's what works best for your family, to support them there.
So many options. So I have to ask, because I have a degree in American Sign Language, it lights my heart up to teach little kids. I have a course called Sign to Speak that we bridge communication. But we start signing to them at 3 months. We let them use the signs as a bridge. Once they can talk, they drop the signs. All is well. Where do you stand on using signs with infants and toddlers, specifically when they're delayed? Because when parents come to me and they say, I think we need to do this, but my child's 2.5 and I want her talking, not signing. Are we going to go backwards? What's your take?
Absolutely. So I love using sign language, and it's really, you can kind of think of it as we're just teaching them gestures, which is a form of communication. There's a big misconception out there that using any sort of alternative or augmentative communication, whether it's gestures or sign language or picture symbols, or, even a device, a communication device, if that's what's necessary, that hinders communication. But that's actually false. There's lots of research, because, I'm all about the research.
Me too.
That shows that using any of those things actually really supports language development. And I love that you said that it bridges the gap, because that really is true. It gives our little ones a tool to communicate when they're just not ready for talking yet. They're still working on all of those skills. Learning to talk is like climbing a staircase. And if there's a step missing along the way, think about if that happened to you and you'd have to make a huge step to the next one, and your little ones just can't do that. We need to make sure they have all of those steps. So giving them something to use in the meantime to help them communicate makes them less frustrated, helps you be less frustrated. It just is better for everybody.
It's amazing. I love that analogy that you created for us. And honestly, if you're listening and you have a true COVID baby, you're not just seeing speech delays, right? You're probably experiencing some gross and fine motor delays as well, some physical stuff, maybe some potty training, maybe some eating stuff. So there's a lot going on for you. And here's the thing about signing. It uses a different skill set. Kids can sign with their skills, with their gross motor skills, long before their tongue is actually ready to do the job of making speech sounds. So it's a win-win. And I love that you pointed out that more language is better. It's like, you want to become a better reader, you go read some more.
Exactly. And in terms of, if you think of motor skill development, that's absolutely true that we develop, first those gross motor movements, like, things like crawling and walking, movements that use our whole body. And then as we get a little bit older, we get some of those fine motor, those smaller movements. And speech is really, I call it the finest of fine motor tasks, because everything we use to talk is so small and the movements are so precise that it really makes sense why it takes so long for our little ones to really master that skill, because they have to really learn how to control all of that first.
Kristi, I could talk to you all day long, but I respect your time and our listeners' time. But I have one more burning question, because I have played in the world of as a deaf educator and with kids with hearing loss, whether that's, hard of hearing or complete and total loss. Parents very often get concerned when kids are very late to talk that there might be some type of hearing issue. When I had kids, they did not do hearing tests at birth. So it was accurate to think that you might need to go have your child auditorily tested. They now do. So if people have 3-year-olds, they pass the screening as a newborn, but now they're just not talking still, should they go get another hearing test?
Absolutely. Whenever I do an evaluation, when I meet with a family for the first time, I always check in to see if they've had an additional hearing screening. A lot of times, little ones just get a lot of wax buildup. Maybe they have a lot of ear infections. The anatomy of their ear actually changes as they go through toddlerhood. And that's why little ones are so prone to things like ear infections. And so something as simple as, clearing that up, maybe they need tubes in their ears. So maybe it's not a true hearing loss, but there may be something blocking the way. That's an easy fix. And when that tends to be the case, there usually is a language explosion after that.
Easy fixes are my favorite type of fixes.
Yes.
Thank you so much for spending time with us today. And please tell everybody how they can find you online, how they can tap into your services if that's something that they think they need to do, because my goal is to make it accessible for everybody to win the toddler years for themselves in their own homes, where it feels good and that you're making forward progress.
Absolutely. So you can find me on Instagram. I'm at littletalkers_little eaters. I give both speech and feeding tips for parents of babies and toddlers. I also have a program right now. It's called the Thriving Toddlers Program. And I'm really excited about it because it is a course that really helps you understand everything your little one needs to know to get them to start talking, and everything you need to do along the way. But what makes it really different and kind of really one of a kind is that you also get my support throughout the program. So you get group coaching calls, you get check-ins, you get the opportunity to submit feedback, because like I said, it's really not one size fits all. You need to be able to figure out where exactly your child is having difficulty and what to do, and build that confidence and belief in yourself. That way you can continue to build those skills for them as they get older.
You see how many resources there are for you out there, depending on what your needs are. Next week, I have my live webinar, Transforming Your Triggers, how to go from knee-jerk reactions to intentional responses. And I'd love if you join me for that, because that has a different outcome. That is more about you feeling calm and safe enough in your body to put away those things that came with you from childhood, right? To break those cycles and say, I choose to talk to my child differently and build a different relationship with my child than I had when I was one. So there are tons of resources for you. And Kristi is here and I am here. And all these links will be in the show notes. And we really are rooting for you. We want you to feel like your COVID babies have recovered their lost milestones and you are sending them out into the world truly ready to be independent, good friends, good students, good learners.
Absolutely. Parenting is really hard. And it's just so great that we live in a time where we're able to support each other, regardless of your community, where you live, what resources are available locally. There's so many other resources out there because we all need them. We all need some help sometimes.
Yes. And as moms, we find it very hard to ask for help, but
Yeah.
We're seeing that tide turn as well. You get to choose your village, moms. And if your village includes Kristi, fantastic. If it includes somebody who's going to come along physically into your home and do the work with you, great. If it includes me, amazing. We are here for you at your disposal. Kristi, thank you for your time and your energy and your expertise. Good luck to you as you continue your beautiful journey as the mom of a 1-year-old.
Yes, thank you so much. It was great to be able to talk with you.
I hope you are enjoying our back to school mini series that will run all through the month of August and the beginning of September. Topics that are relevant to where you are and what your kids are going through right now as you start full-time daycare programs, preschool enrollments, and even those first few days of kindergarten. Please take a moment and scroll down, rate and review the show. Let people know what you love about it and leave me a note of an episode topic you would love to see me record. Until next time, stay mindful and proactive as we raise school-ready kids who will change the world.